Okay, greetings and welcome to another Ligali Live. You're here with me, your host, Tariq Betu. I'm in the studio with the wonderful as ever, Oleander. Hold on, that's not Oleander, there she is. Hi.
Here I am. Greetings.
Greetings. And we're going to go through another hour's worth of news, updates, chat, discussions, and all the usual gremlins that tend to happen as we iron out the bugs of this format. So remember, you can contact us or you can join us on Zoom. I think the details are somewhere on the screen. So if you look at the ticker tape as it's going by, you'll see the meeting code, and Oleander will let you in. You can do all the chat stuff like that. We should be live on YouTube. So if you want to just observe and watch and send messages that way, we're trying to get a system so the messages come up into the studio so I can actually see them direct, but it's still a little bit more work to do. But yeah, it's great to have you with us, and I'm going to get started with some of the news. Okay, so we've got this new kind of image view thing where we're going to try out, and there's quite a lot to go through. So I'm going to, you know my style, I'm going to whiz through it, and as ever, if you want to kind of like make some feedback or some comments, and please do so. Oleander, same, likewise. If there's anything you want to say, just join in the chat. But there's a lot to go through. I don't even know if we're going to make it all in an hour. So I'm going to start off really with the first story, which is of the tragic passing of our brother, the elder Menelik Shabazz. There's not much more I can say that hasn't been said about his genius, about his contribution to our work, not just on the screen, but behind the screen, because I knew him first through the Black Filmmakers magazine and the festivals, the work that he was doing to encourage talent from our community and tell us, that in no uncertain terms, our stories are worthy of actually being on the screen. And his passing is still a shock to many of us. I don't even know what else I can really say. There's been some beautiful tributes. I think there's one on the BFI website, so you might want to check that out by some of his friends and people who've worked with him across the time as well. So that's a tragic piece of news to start with, but may the ancestors kind of like be pleased with his work. I'm going to continue. The next news story is one of our sister, Sha'Carri Richardson. Now, I don't know if you've heard this story. Unfortunately, this is the young athlete who was found with some cannabis inside her system while she was doing one of these runs, and they did a check on her, and she's now unfortunately out of the Olympics. Now, you should know that actually having cannabis in your system isn't seen as an enhancement drug, so it's not caused with cheating. If anything, it's stress relief and preparation. But the rules have been in place for a long time, and I think the fact that she can no longer compete in the forthcoming Olympics is a reason for us to think about those rules changing. Cannabis just shouldn't be on there. I mean, in some states in America, it's actually legal. I mean, even though we know it as a herb with medicinal purposes and uses. But unfortunately, our sister, I think she's put a tweet out or a quote out somewhere saying that she's quite sorry that she can't represent this year, but she'll be back the next time the Olympics come round. So this is really, it's about an overdue time we started talking about the issue of legalizing cannabis. That's probably another program, but I think it's something we need to talk about. Did you want to say something on that?
Well, just to say that yes, it should not be on the list, because cannabis is not something that is going to boost your energy, and so I think if it is going to be on the list, it shouldn't be on the list as something that is going to enhance an athlete's performance, because unless you're saying that if she's more relaxed and less stressed, that will boost her energy. I don't know what they're trying to say regarding cannabis use, but yeah, I think it should not be on that list.
Yeah, it's not on the list as enhancing performance. It's actually just there as a prohibited drug. So that's the reason why they've classified it. So they do recognise the fact.
But why is what I'm saying? Why is it prohibited?
Yeah, well, that's a taboo topic, and that's something that, again, that's another debate, but it shouldn't be on the list, and I think that's one thing. Okay, I'm going to continue on with another story. This time, let me see if we can get that working. This technical stuff keeps... there we go. Last. Talking on the issue of sports. I don't know if you've heard the story about the swimming hat for African people's hair essentially being banned. There's an organisation that makes these caps. I think they call them soul caps, and they're designed, taking in mind our hair, our texture, the size of our heads, etc. And then FINA, which is this regulatory body for swimming, etc., have said that no, they can't. We're not going to let anyone who wears a cap like that actually compete. And it's, obviously, this is Afrophobic. It's just ridiculous. It's just another form of racism again as well. Recognising that, or failing to recognise that human beings come in a plethora and diversity of shapes, and kind of like making a stringent rule, saying that only one type of cap for one type of head shape, and even that is completely nonsensical. Is something that needs to be looked into. And to its credit, I think I saw last night FINA had issued a statement or some sort saying that they're going to review their decision. But I think they've only taken that stance because people have actually come out and said that this is just outrageous, and we just can't even believe this happening in 2020. It just doesn't make 2021.
It actually reminds me of when at school we were told to wear skin colour tights, but they wasn't looking at our skin colour. It was European girls' skin colour, so it was like American tan or something like that. And it was ridiculous. You when you wear those colours, it just really makes your skin look terrible. So this is exactly the same thing. Them not thinking about anyone else's either hair texture or skin tone or any of those things. It's all about what it makes the grade for them and for their people.
Yeah. So let's see what happens with the review of this decision, because again, you'd think that these things would change by now. So the next story I want to cover is that of the education report that came out. Now remember, these news stories of what happens within the 2 weeks between these broadcasts. So there's quite a lot of stuff to go through sometimes, and we try not to always focus on negative stories, but unfortunately the news tends to be about all the things that are going wrong, as opposed to hearing much about the things that are going good. And one of the things that's going wrong again is that, we know about the Creed report, which was trying to pretend that institutional racism and systemic racism doesn't exist. Now there's an educational report that's trying to say that all the support that's gone towards young people from minority ethnic backgrounds, whether they be Gypsy, Roma, whether they be African, whether any background who is actually needed, they're saying that all that support has actually siphoned away help from what they term the white working class children who are now being left behind. And so what they want to do is withdraw all that funding, from like SEN, all kinds of help that's actually really been a method to increase, kind of like academic attainment inside a system that really isn't known for its meritocratic approach to dealing with all children who are essentially disabled, and widen this on a political agenda. And it's quite, it's not one of those topics I really talk about, because I don't think anyone argues that there are many children of European heritage who are left behind by some of the failings of an inclusive education system which encompasses all, irrespective of their class or their gender or their sexuality and all these kind of issues. We recognise that. I think what makes this particularly sick is the fact that they're saying that to help one group, we have to take away the resources from another. And that's the problem. This has been politicised. No one's saying that you shouldn't be helping all children. What we should be saying is actually we've seen that there are resources available when the political will's there to help everyone. And this shouldn't be a politicised issue. We've had this debate and we've seen this debate. I think the Runnymede organisation trust, they wrote a report about this same issue maybe like 15 years ago. I mean, this is a cyclical debate, and it's basically just people being sour grapes about helping other people. It's a toxic kind of like a situation that we've been seeing over the last 12 months, and it's continuing to grow. Another story I want to talk about is exactly the same, well, I say the same thing. It's the rape review that was recently published. And again, it's like, why would anyone use a topic like rape to score political points? What we can see here is that there's a disparity when it comes to the outcomes and investigations of women of African heritage and people from minority ethnic backgrounds when they complain about rape and being taken seriously than the ethnic majority. And this isn't a case of kind of trying to say like, oh, boo-hoo, there's racism in the system and blah, blah, blah. It's just saying, actually, if you're going to do a review, then do a review and be holistic, be, really thorough in the way that you approach your work, and make sure that you understand that where there has been disparities, where there has been inequities, when you're finding out that some women are making complaints and they're finding it harder to be taken seriously, and it's got nothing to do with the veracity or the evidence of their claim, but it's got something to do with their background. That's kind of like what the review should be about. That's what the review should also be addressing. And this address, as you can see from the headline, completely ignores that reality. Again, we're talking about inequalities, and this is unfortunately a tragic ongoing injustice, and this is the Windrush, what they call compensation scheme. It should have been a reparations program, to be honest with you, but what it was is a compensation scheme, and it's been run by the Home Office that has the same staff, not all of them, but the same administrative structure that created the problem in the first place. I'm pretty sure I don't need to go over the whole issue of what happened with the Windrush scandal. But what's happening now is that people are calling out and saying, look, you're taking the mick. We know that there are thousands of people who are affected by the scandal. And I think it's only a few hundred, if that's actually received any kind of recompense or any kind of reparation for what's taken place. And it's time now that the process was actually handed to an independent body that was outside government, that was outside the influence of the same people who keep publishing the reports that I've just been talking about time and time again. Because this is a long process. And on top of what's going on with Windrush, with Brexit, we're starting to see similar patterns happen with Eastern European members of the British public. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're now being seen as foreigners, even though they might have lived here for like 20, 30 years. And so, it's time. It's time that people got together and started saying, we're going to have to start dealing with these processes outside the hands of government. And that's a tricky task to do, but it's something that's necessary. Okay, just as a quick reminder, you're listening myself, Tony Betu and Oleander Betu, and we are just going through the news, Ligali Live. You can contact us through Zoom. And hopefully, I say hopefully, this is still streaming live on YouTube. So we're just running through the news of the last 2 weeks, and if you want to share a story, if you want to pass some comments or feedback on some of the things, if you want to disagree, please feel free to join us in the Zoom chat, and we'll kind of like keeping you alive. So the next story is talking about the Windrush. Is a good story. Is a plaque that was set up for Paulette Wilson outside the former home of Enoch Powell, and he's the Rivers of Blood Tory who started pushing this immigration and racist rhetoric back in the days. And I think it's quite nice. It's quite, I'm suspecting this is the work of our beloved brother Nubian Jack, but it's nice to have acknowledgement of those who have proven the bigots and the racists to be wrong. And like I said, we don't get much good news stories, but I thought this one would be one that's nice to share. The NHS story. Make your choice. This is a really difficult one for me because, as you know, I'm a nerd. I deal with research, and I am a big fan of data. I think that we should always participate in research that's going to help us if it's done ethically. The problem with this situation that I'm going to talk about now is that as much as I'm a great fan of the NHS and the NHS workers, and I think I've mentioned this before, one of the problems we have is that we can't trust politicians who seem to sell off parts of the NHS for commercial gain and for unethical reasons. And so this is just really me just flagging up that there's a web page on the NHS website that enables you to opt out of their sharing of your personal health data with any commercial entities. And then, if you decide that they've actually improved their policies, they're not engaging in unethical practices, you can always opt back in. But I think it's really important to know that you can actually opt out. And I'll be really clear about this. When we opt out of health collecting data, initiatives such as what the NHS engage in, there is a consequence. It does mean that when we're looking for cures, we're looking for research to help into ailments that are culturally specific or culture bound, that affect ethnic groups in a different way, that we actually end up being disadvantaged. So I do always support the idea of engaging with these kind of research programs if they are ethical. But I think we need to be sure, and I don't have assurances. I opted out, and for me that was quite heartbreaking. We have to be sure that the research and the data is going to places that are ethical. And I keep saying ethical. It's because it's not the NHS staff, it's not the teams on the ground doing the work, but it's actually those who are, I wouldn't even say it's the managerial staff, I mean, maybe some of them, but it's those who are the Hancocks of the world, the Savids of the world, the politicians of the world, who are happily siphoning off different departments, looking to bring profit into healthcare. And that's very, very dangerous. This is probably related. This is a story, selective free speech, and this is about academics feeling what's called cancel culture. So this particular story came about because there was this body in Oxford that was looking at the legacy of, I think it was Churchill, no, it was Rhodes, one of the two. And they were doing some academic work looking at the history, and I think it was Rhodes, let me get it right, and they were trying to find out what should be done and kind of like how do we give a more holistic image, how do we write with a bit more accuracy, kind of avoid all the bombasticness, talk about the negatives of the person's legacy, but put it in the context of history. And they were shut down. They were shut down by their university. And so you've got to remember, these are historians. That's their craft. That's their job. That's their area of expertise. That's what they know. But they're being shut down. So you keep hearing about cancel culture being used against right-wing activists, against white supremacist organisations. And I just want to remind us all that actually, no, cancel culture is being used against people like myself. If I say anything that's against white supremacists, that doesn't celebrate people like William Wilberforce, you'll find that people will try to cancel me. And they have actively tried to do that. And unfortunately, one of the things that happens is that some of our allies on the left kowtow to it. They bend over and kneel down before racists. And so you can be doing positive work for over a couple of decades. And the right has learned how to weaponize cancel culture in a way that is increasingly dangerous. So that's all I'm going to say on that one. But that story came up about that one. I don't know if you want to say anything, Colin, and just let me know. I'm just rabbiting away. There's quite a lot to go through. Okay, so now this was a strange one. Anyone knows I'm not a cricket fan. That was my dad. And other than what was that film that I loved? Oh God, something in the fire. I've got it over there in a DVD collection as well. It'll come back to me. I'm not a greatest cricket fan. That was like my father and his generation. But this story is really interesting in light of what I just said, because this character, Ollie Robinson, had made some racist comments and tweets, etc. And I'm not one of those fans who thinks that they should be ostracised for the rest of their life for something they did when they were teenagers and stuff like that. I don't believe in that. But apparently these comments were quite outrageous and quite racist, and he received I think it's an 8-match ban, and rightly so. I mean, that's cool. The problem, and the reason why we're talking about him now, is that his suspension was actually put off. So I think he did a 3-match ban. Then the other 5 matches is being deferred for like another 5 or 10 years or something like this. And so effectively, he's now able to start playing again. And I think that's a really, really dangerous precedent to set. It's quite interesting how, like, a young European man who's made racist and sexist comments, who acknowledges that they're racist and sexist, who received an official ban, is now being let off by the same institution that gave them the ban, now that it's not national news. I've never seen that happen to anyone from my community, anyone who talks on an ethical issue about politics. It's kind of like this name and shame, and it's like this eternal badge that people have to wear. But I think this is a very interesting case where we're seeing privilege kicking place, where actually behind closed doors a decision was made to suspend the suspension. That's essentially what it is. And we need to be mindful of these kind of things taking place right in front of our very eyes. We're often unaware. We see the big fanfare when a suspension happens, but we don't follow the process through. And that's what I'm about, following the process through. What happens when it's not in the spotlight? We have to watch those parts. It might be the boring work, but we really do need to watch those parts. So that's Ollie Robinson. This is an interesting story. I'd say interesting story. They're pretty all interesting stories as well. This one's about a flat in Camden that was named after Cecil Rhodes. And Cecil Rhodes, as we just mentioned, is a white supremacist who we recognise shouldn't be valorised and celebrated and kind of elevated in the public realm. And the question came about as the named flats should come down. And yeah, I mean, Camden did the right thing and started that process. But then they consulted with the residents in the flat, and some of the residents knew who he was, some who didn't, some cared, some didn't. And this is all very, by and by with these kind of things, and I don't have any issue with that. But then they decided on a name. Somebody said Cecil Rhodes, so we can maybe rename the building after a freedom fighter of the era or something symbolic that kind of talks about justice. But the residents actually didn't want that. They said they didn't want any names anymore. And I get that. We don't have to have everything symbolise a human name. But what they decided to go for was, was it Parkview? So I think it's now called Parkview Estates. It's their choice. Much them they want to call it a bland, kind of like estate agent friendly, gentrified name like Parkview. But I guess there's something in it just makes me a bit queasy. You see, because when you have the name of a racist or white supremacist in the public realm just kind of venerating evil for like decades and centuries, and no one challenges it, and that name's been going out there and people have been normalising and kind of like taking it in, using his name, you know, writing it, spreading it, invoking it continuously. There's a whole lot of spiritual, political capital that goes out with that. So when you take the symbol down, which is the right thing to do, then what you put back up, if it's a bland, neutral name like Parkview, which is quite ironic because the States looks over a cemetery, so it should actually be called Cemetery View if you want to be quite accurate, or Graveside View. But if you're going to name it Parkview, then what happens is that you don't actually repair the injustice that's taken place. You don't actually balance out the veneration of evil that's taken place over the centuries. What you do actually is that you keep it with an asset. You keep it, you know, in the positives, and that for me is quite distasteful. You know, I mean, like I said, I don't live there, so it's not my choice, and I kind of respect these people-led processes. But it's just something I think we need to think about and have discussions about, and I worry when these kind of things happen. You know, but that's me. Remind you, you're listening to watching Ligali Live. It's me, your host, Tony Better. I'm here with the wonderful Oleander, just going through some of the news headlines. I think you know you can click on through Zoom and all that kind of stuff. And we're just going over the news for the last couple of weeks. Just going over the headlines, really. Just kind of like, you know, reasoning over some of the things. But yeah, let me go on. Now, there's been a lot of tragic stories like this one. I think it says it all when the headline is "Teenager stabbed to death in Sydenham, South East London." The papers aren't even bothering to give them their names. We don't even know the names of these young people who are being murdered. I mean, you can read the body and they come up, but it's so frequent, it's so often now. And I say that not to create panic. It's still, you know, in the context of the amount of people living in the area, it's still a ridiculous minority. But from a community level, it's huge, because every single young person who loses their life in this violent and senseless, tragic way affects not just their family and their friends, but the entire community through the ripples that takes place. And so another teenager, I think this particular case I saw on the news last night, somebody may have been arrested with this, the one, you know, but no, actually this is not the one, that's because it's the one in Oxford Street where someone's been arrested. This one's the one where I think BBC London had police officers come into the local community and talk about what they're going to be doing and how they want the community to help them find the perpetrators, find the murderers, the killers, and how they recognise the importance of community engagement. And we're probably going to talk about the police later on, and they make a point that without information, without intelligence, as they call it, it's just information. I don't like using the term intelligence, that's got a different meaning. It's much harder to solve these murders. Much, much harder. And so there's work to be done. You know, I'll move on that. But this violent crime seems to be on the upcrease, and as things are going back to what many people are referring to as normal, we need to remember that what was normal to many others was toxic, poisonous, impoverishing, precarious to us. So please be mindful when you use that term.
I think for me that one of the most disturbing things is the number of murders that have happened this year and we haven't even, we're just now around just over halfway, and it's more murders or deaths as it was last year, the whole of last year. That's really, I don't even know what to say. I find it really disturbing and upsetting. As a parent myself, you know, it worries me. It worries me all the time. And, you know, people talk about there being a kind of gang warfare. What do they call that again on the streets now? That it is warfare on the streets. There was another term, but I've forgotten what it is. But anyway, it's just really worrying. And I would say most people, either they know someone who's lost someone or they know of someone. It's just getting too close, and it's just awful.
No, I mean, of course, we speak about it as parents, two boys, that target group, that age where they're vulnerable every time they go out. You never know, the risk of what's going to happen. And, people kind of like look at it as something that's community sourced. They say like, it's just young Africans killing other young Africans, and it's really simplistic, crude analysis of the situation, but it's far more complex than that. It's actually young people who've given up on a society that's given up on them. And what they're doing is that they're using their creative genius to find new ways to survive. And some of them are actually going into areas of crime. And as they go into those areas of crime without, any kind of like moral compass kind of steering them away, they engage in levels of violence which accompanies those new enterprises. I never justify violence and criminal behaviour which leads to violence, but what I won't do is demonise them as some kind of like monsters, and as if it's inherent to our character, when the majority of our children are not involved. And I say the majority, we're talking about maybe 0.001% of our young people engaged in some of this badness. The thing I think we also have to be mindful of, and we need to be cognizant and find out what's going on, is actually not just the murders, because the newspapers, they like sensationalism, so they talk about this when it's a situation of murder, when someone's lost their lives. But there's a lot of injuries. It's just like with wars, there's a lot of injuries that are taking place, stabbings, wounding, just the level of violence. And then we can start talking about domestic violence, and some of that is actually internal. We're talking about with children and parents, let alone from children to children, and going across all kinds of levels. And this level of violence, we need to really have a better idea, a better mapping of what's taking place, why it's taking place. How do we intervene? How do we start shifting? What interventions can we make as a community? Because the intervention that the state always seems to offer is more police on the streets. They think they can just continuously arrest and imprison young people. They think they can continuously exclude young people, and this will solve the problem. And yet every single generation, this repeats itself, because the system just spreads the wealth and the gap between the rich and the poor, exponentially, continuously. So, this is, I don't know, we'll talk about this another time, but yeah. But another faceless headline, just a teenager stabbed to death. Next story. Now, I said we need to do something about this. I said we need to make a difference. We need to find a ways of working out how do we intervene. What interventions can we make? Some of those interventions will be activist-led. Some of those interventions will be challenging systems of oppression, will be challenging school decisions, it will be challenging local authorities and youth provisions, it will be challenging enterprises and commercial businesses that are using exclusive employment tactics. People talk about being diverse, but the reality of the situation is, things aren't quantifiably that much better. If you're a young person and you are, you haven't done well at school, or you have done well at school, but you represent yourself in a way that is culturally authentic, this diminishes your chances of employment. This diminishes your chances of getting a loan to start your own entrepreneurial business. All these factors are very real. So what's this story? 12 arrested in raids on extension rebellion sites in London. Well, the reason why I included that story is because, for those of you who know me, clearly, as a scholar activist, I support activism, but I support activism of all types. And some of the activism that I support and I'm a fan of is actual cultural activism. That's where people go on the streets as well, or they go into museums, or they protest, and they create banners, they create artworks, they create all kinds of structures and symbols and things just to highlight the plights of those who need their plight highlighted, and they also use these artifacts that they create, these cultural constructs they create, to galvanise more support. Because it's very difficult cutting through the media right now, unless you do something outrageous, and obviously if you do something outrageous, you're going to get arrested. So sometimes it's the art that does it. It's the song, it's the poem, it's the structure. And when I saw this story about Extinction Rebellion, my heart stopped. Because what happened in this particular case, this was last week, Extinction Rebellion had planned a couple of protests. And before the protest took place, the police raided the spaces where they were actually working on the art, where they were making the posters, the t-shirts, the banners, and they confiscated the art making material. Some people got arrested, but it wasn't, there was no protest taking place. The police did what they called a preemptive strike. They went in and took all the art making equipment. And I want you to think on that. Think about what that means. They hadn't started a protest, but the police decided that actually, let's disrupt the protest before it happens by taking away the pens. That's basically what this is, isn't it?
That reminds me of Minority Report.
You're talking about like pre-crime.
Yeah. So arresting people or stopping them in their tracks before they've even done anything.
I'm glad you said that, because we're talking about essentially a pre-crime. We're talking, and it's not even a protest isn't a crime. Well, not until the bill comes through, in which case loud protests could be classified as a crime. But the fact that the police last week seized craft making material, paper mache, pens, paint, and arrested people at site, and they weren't protesting. I just want you to be aware of that, because protest is one of the tactics that we use to communicate our frustrations. And when we go to the nth degree and it explodes into civil unrest, people are like, well, why did they go burning down their own community? Why are they going to these extremes? Why are they pushing over police cars? What's going on? There's all these other avenues for democratic protests. Well, actually, those avenues for democratic protests are being shut down. And they're being shut down by what we call laws, legislative laws, which are completely unethical. And we have to remember, just because something is made legal doesn't mean it's ethical. Because I don't need to remind any of you about people who will make that horrendous claim that slavery was legal. So let's go on. Derek Chauvin. Well, I don't even want to put his name in my mouth. So all I'm going to say, he got 22.5 or 22 and a half years for murdering another human being. So it's some sort of justice. It's good. I mean, he's convicted. It's historic. But what did it take for justice to be delivered? It took a young teenager who probably would now be arrested for filming that activity. It's really interesting I say that, actually, because one of the tactics, just as a heads up and a slight aside, one of the tactics that police officers in America do now is that if you start filming them while they're actually abusing their authority, then they actually pull out their own phone and start playing music really loud. And they do that deliberately, because then if they use a commercial track, you won't, or there's a good chance when you try to upload your video on YouTube, the YouTube content protection scheme, the program that checks to see if you're actually using someone else's copyright, can actually stop your video from being shared. So this is a new tactic that some police officers are doing in America, and no doubt we'll start seeing that stupidity over here. But this man, I'm not going to make much about that, but what I will say is I don't think 22 and a half years is long enough for the murder of George Floyd. I don't think it was appropriate for his mother to speak about her son in the way that she did without making any reference to George Floyd. She's welcome to talk about her son, I get that, but it just didn't feel right. So the criminal justice system still isn't fit for purpose as far as I'm concerned, but there is progress, and let's try and stay positive on that aspect.
Sorry, can I just say that I think that yes, it's historical, yes, it's set a precedence, and yes, 22 and a half years isn't enough. But let's face it, he's not even going to do 22 and a half years, because with things like good behaviour, and all, the fact that he's a police officer, all these things are going to be taken into account, and he'll probably end up doing, 15 years maybe. So that actually makes it even worse for me, because whenever people are sentenced to some kind of imprisonment, even life imprisonment isn't really life, is it? It's like 30 odd years, and if you're still young enough to live through those 30 odd years, you'll be out. So for me, it's like, it just wasn't good enough. But, as you said, we have to, I guess, take some of the positives from it. And, hopefully, now that has happened, that, not that I'm wishing it to happen again, but if it does, that, hopefully the people will be able to say, well, this has happened before, the person was arrested, that same thing needs to be happening again.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's a very important message that's going across, that actually police officers who murder African people, and it's specifically African people, can actually be brought to justice. Whether the justice is actually proportionate is another issue, but at least we know. My thing is the message. It took an international campaign of people all over the world, all over the world, for one police officer to be found guilty. And that's scary when you think of how many African people who have lost their lives in police custody, who still, their families haven't received justice. But it's a positive. And I'm so tempted to talk more on that one, but I'll leave that one there. Because I know actually we've got other stories that are on the same thing. If you can imagine, if I'm not happy with he who I will not mention, the murderer of George Floyd, then the murderer of our brother Dalian Atkinson, he received 8 years. 8 years. His girlfriend, who was a serving officer at the time, who I think she maced him or hit him with her baton or some kind of nonsense, that, she's going to have to face a new trial because the jury couldn't decide whether she was guilty or not. And the police officer, Monk, who murdered our brother, he wasn't guilty of murder, he was guilty of manslaughter. All these little caveats I find really, really infuriating. If he's got 8 years, then again, he could be out in 4 years for taking someone's life. And you need to place it in context of the fact of not just the tasering of a brother, but also the kicking him in his head when he posed no threat whatsoever. So I struggle to understand that. But again, things are moving slowly. We moved from enslavement to colonialism to neo-colonialism. Still not free. The journey still goes on. Yeah. And again, with something like this, it's a really good reminder that, I don't want to say this, but if he wasn't a famous footballer, if he didn't have the weight of celebrity to put focus, to put a spotlight on what had happened to him. Remember, this happened years ago. Would we be seeing this justice or this form of justice taking place? And the domino effect, let's not forget, if it wasn't for the Black Lives Matter movement, if it wasn't for everything that happened with George Floyd that took place, would PC Monk have been found guilty? I think we know the answer. And that's the reason why, even though this may seem to some people as, yeah, let's party, let's celebrate, things are getting better. No. Don't take your eyes off the ball. None of you. Things haven't changed. And moving forward, incrementally, step by step. I say step by step, but not even, a step is almost like what? You know, like a meter. We're talking about inch by inch, if no, less than an inch. So that's Stallion Atkinson. You're listening to Ligali Live. I'm pretty sure I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try and speed up the pace I go through some of these news stories. We try to keep it to an hour, but you're free to zoom in. I don't know if there's much time, but of course you can just watch us live on YouTube, which is the easiest way, and we're still eyeing at the gremlins, so if there's any echoes or kind of nonsense going on, my apologies. We'll fix it out in due time. So where are we now? What's the next story? Okay. This is a really interesting story. Robin Williams. Now, I don't know if you know the case of this. This was a police officer, a sister, who she won awards for her support of the Grenfell families at their time of need. I mean, she was there on the ground helping people. I mean, many people who know her have given her plaudits for her sensitivity, for her efficiency, all these kind of things. I'm not one who's known to be bigging up the police at all. I don't know her. I don't have no relationship with her, but I do know of her, and you know, no issues. And I don't know if you know the story, but essentially what happened was that someone forwarded her images on her WhatsApp group of some child abuse, and they wanted her to investigate it. And the Metropolitan Police decided that because she had it on her phone, that they would throw the full weight of their disciplinary system on her. And you know, they dismissed her. They tarnished her reputation, her name. They dragged it across national news, internationally, making out as if she was some kind of sexual deviant. Now, the good news, as you can see, is that she's won an appeal against her dismissal. But does that change anything? Does that change the fact that even those of us that are courageous enough to say, you know what, I want to change the system from within, that, you know, I know some people are going to be angry with me for joining the police, but while I'm there, I'm going to try and do the right thing, because if I don't get inside there, then those investigations, I was talking about rape earlier, those investigations that needs cultural sensitivity, that needs to make sure that the eyes are on the ball, so I need to be there to scrutinise it so people can't just push it to the side. Those officers who need that, they are victimised inside the police as well. Now, I'm not going to make this about that, but what I will raise in the consciousness of our community, and what I hope you start thinking about, is that the police don't just impact us negatively and disproportionately on the streets. They also do the same to those of us who are inside the force. And you've really got to understand what that means. Mm-hmm. Virtually every senior police officer who comes from our community has found out that when they need their backs covered, they're not. That when they have to be subjected to canteen culture and they go to supervisors or they make comments and they say, look, can you just cut it out? They're vilified. And when you have a force that is toxic inside and outside, then we have to acknowledge that that police force, because it's not a service, not yet, that police force is not only institutionally racist, but it is institutionally corrupt. And so I wanted to put that story up there because even though it seems like good news, because she's won her appeal against dismissal, she's gone through the cancel culture already. She's been cancelled. It's like that's forever on her record. And there's many of us, brothers and sisters, who, if we stand up for ourselves, if we try and do the right thing on stop and search, we get cancelled inside and outside. So I'm going to leave that there because, you know, I have very bad life experience and lived experiences with the police. You know, it was their racist assault of myself as a young man that made me an activist. So I'm not going to pretend that everything's perfect. But what I will say is that we need to really look at this in a holistic manner and not just in a simple them versus us dichotomy. We have to look wherever, and that's my mantra as an activist. So those of you who know me really well, wherever our people are, that's where I will have to go. If they need help, that's where I go. If I had to go into the belly of the beast, that's where I'll go. And so that's what I want you to start thinking about. I'm not saying all of us are wired to do that, but I'm saying wherever our people are and they are being, you know, put down on, we've got to help. Oh, another police story. This is all in the last 2 weeks. I don't know if you remember the story about Bianca Williams. She was, I think she was being trained by Linford Christie, the superb Olympian and athlete. And she was driving her car. She had a child in the car, and kind of similar to what happened to Dawn Butler. The officers, no, it was worse than what happened to Dawn Butler because she wasn't a politician. They didn't know who she was at the time. And so they just dragged them out of the car, roughed them up and stuff like that. And then the Metropolitan Police Commissioner backed those officers, just like she backed the abuse of women during the Sarah Everard protests. Just backed it straight out. Now we know that actually some of the officers who were involved in that arrest are going to be investigated for gross misconduct. Apparently there's some things in their history that they might have not declared or they might have done in the past or whatever. But why, why are we still here? I mean, why is this still going on? I'll move on. We'll watch this space. We'll watch this story.
Yeah.
I think this might be the last story, actually. And we've got 7 minutes, I think, to go. A couple of days ago, the United Nations issued a report. I think it's like 27 pages. I read the whole thing. And they basically interviewed and had discussions with people from all over the world, African heritage, who had had bad interactions with the police, who died in custody. And they just put out a statement saying that police forces all over the world, especially those in the diaspora, they weren't really speaking about the continent in this particular report. And there are issues in the continent, trust me. I've had a gun put to my head by police in Nigeria because they were corrupt and I was reporting on them. But the UN are saying, actually, as long as the police are running around with impunity, then this won't stop. And I think they're correct. I think as long as the police officers who are racist think that they can continue doing their Afrophobic actions, their violence against our community, in whatever country, not just the UK here now, without any scrutiny. And actually, I don't want to say scrutiny, because scrutiny is always the way that we're being told to engage with these things. It's not about scrutiny. Telling us how many people you're stopping and searching and how many people you're harassing and how many people you're beating up and how many people you're killing. Scrutiny is not enough. That's one part of research. What we need is to be participating in the process of investigation. That's when things start to change. So the UN is saying that stop this. The report is, it's like I said, it's quite short. Talks about enslavement, talks about colonialism. It goes through historic context, and it has some recommendations. It's not quite as cutting as I'd like it. I love the spirit, I love the energy, the message is clear, but sometimes you just need to speak blunt and talk it plain. And it doesn't quite do that, so I don't think many people outside nerds like me would actually read it. And if people outside me don't read it, that means that those inside, the politicians, believe it or not, many of them are pretty damn lazy. They won't read it, so they won't pass legislation or act on it. And if they're not going to do it, then there's no pressure on chief commissioners and the what's nots, to do the same thing. So that's where we are. I think that is the last story. There's been many, many more, but I think I got tired after going through those lots and selecting them for you. Yeah, you're listening to me, your host, Tonic Better. I'm in the studio with my beloved Oleander, and we're just going through the news. Ligali Live, 4th of July 2021. The time is 20:26. You've got 4 minutes to join us on Zoom. I think the details are somewhere in the bottom there. If you want to kind of like say anything, if you want to share a bereavement with us, because this is actually a community broadcast. It's actually also for announcements of bereavements as well. I'm sorry I took up all the time. Actually, the plan was really that the news would be done in half an hour, and then the other half hour we'd discuss a particular topic. I've got to really think this through. It did dawn on my mind that maybe instead of doing this every fortnight and letting the news get so much and so much to talk about, what I could do is like maybe a shorter program that's half an hour, and then every now and then, like if something comes up, I just jump on the Zoom or jump on the YouTube and do like a quick 5-minute update. But then, the problem with me doing that is that you'd probably hear me when something's just happened, and that's probably when I'm actually quite vexed. And when I'm quite vexed and I haven't had time to reflect and think on these things, I'm not always at my smoothest and my best, because I just want change immediately. I still always want change immediately, but you know what I'm talking about. Oleander, what do you think? How we go?
I think it would be better to do the news in half an hour rather than a whole hour. But of course it kind of depends as well on whether there is any news. Like with the news program, sometimes they have no news days, so then they'll talk about a cat that got stuck up in the tree. We don't want to have to necessarily do something like that. We could have spoken about Bill Cosby as well, which as most people know, he's going to be, I don't know, has he actually been released?
He's been released on a technicality.
Yeah.
So, it's a very strange one, because, a lot of us are doing wrong and strong on that. I know this won't make me popular, but Bill Cosby, I'm a Bernie. I mean, let me be clear, actually. I grew up, and there were 2 African Americans series that kind of like set the tone for families, a development for me. The first, 3 actually. The first was The Cosby Show. I mean, that was huge for me and my family. We loved it, and we watched it, and it's a cultural institution, and no one can take that away from everyone who was involved in that. After that was The Fresh Prince, and again, that was huge, another cultural institution. And then finally after that, I know there's been loads and loads, but for me and our family, with my queen here, it was the Bernie Mac show. Those 3 set the framework of African family and in the diaspora, and the kind of different tensions and different dynamics and kind of like, different aspirations, and kind of set the times changing. And if you ask me who ultimately kept it real out of all of them, it wasn't Bill. It wasn't even Will. It was Bernie Mac. For me, he was on it. And obviously he's now an ancestor. And he called it when it comes to Cosby. He called it. Before he joined the ancestral realm, he told us that he was a bad one. And, people can start talking about conspiracies and all that kind of stuff, but I believe there's a ring of truth in the accusations against Cosby. I think there's a lot of nonsense in there. I think there's a lot of people who are looking for money and a payout, but I think that he was involved in some sexual assaults. And anyway, I can't be cheering and I can't be supporting the fact that he got out on a technicality, and the man is guilty. It don't set right with me. And I know some in our community will do the wrong and strong thing. We did it with R. Kelly, and I'm telling you from personal knowledge, personal experience, R. Kelly is a bad one. A very, very bad one. This is not an O.J. Simpson situation. I remember it's the one time I feel embarrassed and I feel ashamed. I knew O.J. was likely to have done it, But at that time, with the Rodney King and everything like that, I just wanted the system to take a blow. And Johnny Cochran, I was so proud I was just so proud of him that I kind of like had what I call a moral deficit moment. And like, as much as I didn't like OJ, and as much as I knew that he probably did it, you know, I did want Cochran to win. And I'm not proud of that. And you know, I don't do wrong and strong, and I presume, I mean, that's why I'm admitting it now. I mean, but that's one of the times I was wrong. I'm not going to lie. And but this thing with Cosby, nah. So you're right. We could have discussed that.
Well,
so,
we did.
Yeah, I said I wasn't going to do that actually because, but yeah, it is. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I think it'll be good to have a guest on. Perhaps we'll have a weekly guest. It was great having Brother Ngomo on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was it last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That was fantastic. And there's so many good people doing stuff in their community. But what I don't want is our Sundays to be tied up with a 3-hour program. That's the thing, and you know how we can chat.
It could easily be done.
Yeah, and the Nsapo, the radio program, that was supposed to be a 2-hour program, and I think we started at we used to start at, was it 7 in the evening, and end up finishing at 2 o'clock in the morning. And boy, it was a beautiful program. I love it. You can still check the podcast on the Ligali website. But I was mashed the day after. The recovery from that program of going live for like 5 hours non-stop, films, music, culture, news, history, libations, everything. It was uplifting, but you know, even the children would be getting ready for school and like, man, Daddy is just gone. Like, you know. So yeah. Okay, any closing words before we log off?
No, just to say that I hope that everybody will continue to be well and look after yourselves out there. Be careful and try to drink lots of water because that really does help.
Okay, sure. And I'm going to close off and I'm going to say thank you for watching Ligali Live. I hope that it was, I don't want to say enjoyable, but I hope it was edifying, educational. I hope you got something out of it. But those are the news from the last couple of weeks. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. We'll keep tweaking the formula. We spend a lot of time making sure that the Zoom works, and we don't even use it. So we might just drop the Zoom aspect. But I like interactivity. I like the idea that anyone can drop by. There's something special about that. I don't like, you know, I know I can chat, but you know, but we'll see. I mean, we're a community organisation, and we're guided by you. What it is that you want to do. That's the most important thing. What is it that helps our community? So I'm going to sign off. Have a blessed weekend. It's Sunday. Do I say have a blessed weekend?
Yes.
Have a blessed week ahead. You can see I'm tired and hungry. Have a blessed week ahead. I just want to pay my respects to Nadia and Menelik's family and Nefertiti and everyone out there who's dealing with that loss. And I'm just going to say, as usual, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us.
Ashe.
Ashe.